Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Feress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Good morning, and welcome to the program. We're going to get started right away where we left off yesterday in this book, Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley, to discover what has happened in recent history in England to help us understand what is happening in the United States today. This is a case where the papacy attempted to overthrow the legitimate government of England, the Protestant government of England, and replace it with papal tyranny. An attempt by the Pope to establish his Roman Catholic hierarchy, both a spiritual authority and a civil authority, and to replace the entire system, the religio-political system that existed in England, with popery, okay, to make Great Britain Roman Catholic, and to give it a Roman Catholic government subservient to the papacy. And we use this example to realize that the very same things are happening in the United States today. And of course, England dealt with it aggressively and openly. There was no secret about about England's protestation against this papal aggression. But America remains largely ignorant about a papal aggression that has taken place in this country. And those that do know about it fear calling it what it is for fear of persecution or reprisals of some kind, or even upsetting the nation's equilibrium and throwing the nation into a religious conflict, a religious civil war. But Inquisition Update tends, of late especially, to tread into places where even angels fear to tread, and I'm sorry, but this is a papal aggression. The papacy is responsible for all the upheaval in our country. It's responsible for our wars. It's responsible for our economic collapse. It's responsible for the transference from this country of its wealth, its gold, and its industry. And it is attempting to destroy Protestant England and make it a Roman Catholic fiefdom. That's what's happening in the United States today, and very little of the goings on of late can be even. You can't even begin to understand what's happening in the country unless you understand what the papacy is involved in doing in the United States. Now, the Pope attempted to establish bishoprics, archdioceses in England that would replace the government. And England took a while to realize and to comprehend the significance, what would result from this. And then they began to act. And even the Tractarians that we've talked about before, that set up shop in Cambridge and the universities, who flooded all of England with these religious tracts that tended to support Roman Catholic doctrine, to gradually, slowly but surely indoctrinate the people to be more friendly to Roman Catholicism. The ones who literally wished that the Pope would come and rescue them from their Protestant government. Once the Pope did so, the Tractarians began to backtrack, okay? They saw the Cyclops from Rome standing on the shores of Great Britain and did an about-face. Maybe Protestantism wasn't so bad after all, okay? So we'll begin now where we left off yesterday on page 49 of the book, if you're following along, the first full paragraph on page 49. He says, even Tractarianism, which for years had been marching with steady but stealthy steps toward the Seven Hills, that is Rome, quickening its speed the nearer it drew to that center of mysterious but potent attraction, suddenly stopped and paused a moment to bethink itself, turned its face in the opposite direction. It blew out all its candles. Remember, candles are part of the religious ceremony of the Roman Catholic Church. They were imitating that. And they took down their crosses. You know, Roman Catholic churches have crucifixes all over the place, so the Tractarians were doing the same thing. And attired itself in vestments a little less fantastic. In other words, these Tractarian priests in training were literally trying to be just as gaudy as a Roman Catholic priest in their vestments. They even toned them down, and they learned to do its devotions with some abatement of that exuberance of genuflection and grimace in which it had found so much spiritual edification aforetime. So even their genuflections, their bowing on one knee, and all had been imitated in the Tractarian movement, and for all intents and purposes, it was trying to fashion itself in the very image of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? And all of this stuff they found spiritually edifying. That is, until they realized what they had done. Okay? Here now the Pope is trying to take over the country by force, without the consent of the people or the government. Just literally running roughshod over the whole nation. It even offended the Tractarians, and they did an about-face. All right? He says, it now beheld a greater than York, a greater than Canterbury in the land. Like the old man who had prayed to death to come to his aid, and when the grim specter stood before him, prayed yet more earnestly that he would depart, so was it with the Tractarians, or as they now began to call themselves, Anglo-Catholics. This body had invoked Rome to come and rescue it from the fetters of Protestantism. And when it saw Rome standing over it, when it felt the light of its red eye, and heard the tones of its voice, still husky by reason of old anathemas, it faltered before the terrible presence and prayed Rome to depart from it for a season. Okay, now, in this was a reference to the Council of Trent. He says, it beheld the monster with the red eye and heard the tones of its voice still husky by reason of old anathemas. What were those that he was referring to? The Council of Trent. Okay, 1565, roughly. The Council of Trent. And in the Council of Trent, the Vatican assembled all of its bishops and literally proclaimed a war of annihilation against Protestantism. The Council of Trent was led by the Jesuits. It was called into session by the Jesuits. It was dominated by the Jesuits, and it included nearly 100 damnations against 100 specific Protestant doctrines. In other words, in total, it was a total condemnation of Protestantism. It rendered Protestantism as heretics, and it simply set out to destroy it. And those old anathemas are still repeated by the Roman Catholic Church. I remember years ago, before I gave up watching television, I used to research Roman Catholicism by simply listening and watching the Roman Catholic channel on television. The Eternal Word Television Network, EWTN. And I had fallen asleep and woke up at some point like 3 o'clock in the morning with the television beside the bed still going. And here was an Asian Roman Catholic priest speaking in broken English. Obviously, he spoke a native Asian language, but was speaking in English at the time. And he was virtually reading verbatim those 100 anathemas that were included in the Council of Trent, that were resolved in the Council of Trent in 1565. And it made the hair stand on my back. Rome is still teaching those anathemas against Protestantism. Now, when the Tractarians, who were trying to Catholicize their people and wishing to be under the authority of the Pope, when they literally saw this Cardinal Wiseman and this papal bull and the erection of bishoprics over over Great Britain in a general usurpation of the entire order of things in England, they had a second thought. And they tried to look more Protestant than ever before. And I would imagine that if the United States of America could actually understand who it is that they're courting in Rome, they would do likewise. The trouble is, they don't know who they are courting in Rome. No one has ever told them that the papacy is, was, and always will be the man of sin, the son of perdition, the historical Antichrist of the Bible, the future Antichrist of the Bible, and every Antichrist all in between. Okay? And when the people of the United States begin to comprehend this, only then will they wake up to their ecumenical error. So it's the business of Inquisition update to prove the point. The papacy is the Antichrist of the Bible. Now, so the Tractarians in Britain faltered. They said, now wait a minute, maybe we bit off more than we can chew. Maybe we bargain for more than we can handle. Maybe Protestantism isn't so bad after all. Now he says, leaving for a while the debates of the Senate and the weighty cares of the judgment seat, learned and eloquent statesmen, donning their armor, hastened to do battle alongside their fellow citizens. Quote unquote, Protestant England, so spoke Lord Chancellor at the inaugural banquet of the Lord Mayor of Guildhall, Protestant England is informed that she has now come under Catholic hierarchy. The hymn of triumph for admission to equality and civil liberty has given place to the note of insult, triumph, and domination, announcing that we have come under a Roman Catholic hierarchy. Considering the language of the document to which I refer, and considering the truly Roman construction which some attempt to put upon the oath of supremacy, it would seem as if some were acting in anticipation of the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, which represents a cardinal's cap as equal to the crown of the Queen of England. If such be anticipated, I answer them in the language of Gloucester. Quote, under our feet we'll stamp the cardinal's hat, in spite of pope or dignities of the church. Unquote. The Lord Chief Justice of the Queen's Bench, speaking for all the judges, refrained from touching on this subject, the one topic to which he found that large and brilliant audience would listen, only because he anticipated the appearance of his quote-unquote eminence, that is the cardinal, and his quote-unquote holiness, that is the Pope of Rome, before his tribunal some of these days to answer for their misdemeanors. Quote, and Pope Pius the Ninth, with triple crown, unquote, his lordship said, should receive the same justice from him as if he were a simple parish priest, unquote. These valorous sentiments were re-echoed by the city magistracy in London, who to encourage the rulers of the country in their steadfast resolution to maintain the independence of the throne and the ancient liberties of the kingdom, that said, quote, whether ministers led or followed, one thing is certain, that Britons never would be slaves to either to Puseyism or to popery, unquote. Now remember, Puseyism was an attempt to corrupt Protestantism and to promote the Mass, okay? To make the communion service a sacrifice, another ritual crucifixion of Jesus Christ on the altar. And Protestants simply do not believe, and for the most part, not only is it unbiblical, but Puseyism, or at least being taught to perceive the communion meal as a sacrifice, another sacrifice of the literal Christ, brings opportunity for the elevation of the priesthood, because it's only the priest, once empowered by the Pope, who can miraculously change the bread and the wine into the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ, so that that sacrifice can even take place. So it's an attempt to deify the priesthood. And that's why it's completely incompatible with Protestantism. Jesus shall never be brought to his shame again. Okay? Never to be sacrificed again. His death was once, and it was all sufficient. And we rest on that truth. And when someone attempts to, in some direct or indirect fashion, tries to teach us that he must die perpetually or die over and over and over again, we protest. Okay? And Great Britain began to protest, but you don't hear much protest in the United States of America. All right. Now it says, satire, as well as grave argument, was called into requisition on this great national emergency. Okay? England calls it a great national emergency. I mean, after all, the United States of America, were it not ignorant of the Roman intent for the United States of America, and literally doing the very same thing in America that we're reading about that it did in England, would call it a national emergency. No less a national emergency if some foreign Islamic imam would come to this country, declare the United States of America in one day had changed from Christianity to Islam, and began to erect jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions in the country, and literally take over the job that our elected government now performs. That would be considered a national emergency, and the American people would react. But they fail to recognize the national emergency that exists by having Washington, D.C. literally crawling with Jesuit priests and literally run by Jesuit-educated politicians, and the Supreme Court occupied by Roman Catholics. That's a national emergency. And I want my listeners to understand it is a national emergency. Protestantism, more importantly, Christ is being overthrown in the country. The Bible is being overthrown in the United States of America, and it's being replaced by the Antichrist and spiritual and scriptural ignorance. And they're changing the whole form of our government to impose Roman Catholic canon law upon us. We are being Catholicized without our permission, without our input in the matter. It was all decided at Vatican Council II. And my listeners need to be educated about it. They need to know about it. They need to know what's really going on so that they might protest. Okay? If no one else has got the courage to tell you exactly what's going on in Washington, D.C., somebody's got to do it. And it's up to you to do a little bit of research on your own. Because if you don't do any of your own research, if you can follow my logic here, if you don't do any of your own research and you don't see this for yourself, having done your own investigation into the matter, then the first opportunity when controversy comes or someone questions what you're saying, you can fall back on this idea, well, it was Tom's opinion. You know, I don't necessarily believe what Tom believes, you see? And so you find yourself equivocating. You make me the owner of this information, and you are an innocent bystander. Well, you can't be an innocent bystander in a national emergency. You're going to have to take a stand, and you're going to have your own opinions and not pass the buck to somebody else. You have to own this. It has to be yours. And so a little, it's wonderful that you're here and listening to this book. I hope and pray that my listeners will pick up this book or other books like it, Protestant literature, and read it for themselves. Do some study in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. Do some study into the writings of the Protestant reformers. Do some study into the Jesuit order and what it was established to do. And then study the history of how the papacy got control of the nations of Europe during the Dark Ages. And then look carefully at current events and see that the same thing's going on today. When you see this stuff with your own eyes, it's not just Tom's opinion. It has merit. And we have to have no uncertain tone in our voice if we're going to convince anyone else or educate anyone else about this. So take a little responsibility and get some ownership of this information. Now he says satire, as well as grave argument, was called into requisition on this great national emergency. Reason, speaking through the higher organs of the press, labored to prove that the claims of the pontifical court were unfounded and treasonable. And laughter, finding its vent in the lighter journals, we're talking about two layers of the press, the official, serious, CNN-type press in England at the time, took a serious look at this papal aggression and called it what it is. But on the other hand, the lighter side of the press, the USA, well, let's see, what could I give you for an example? Oh, let's just call it Saturday Night Live, okay? They had their own truth to tell about this, but they used levity to get the point across. All right, it says Reason, that is CNN, speaking through the higher organs of the press, labored to prove that the claims of the pontifical court, that is, their claim to the ownership of England, were unfounded and treasonable. And laughter, that is, Saturday Night Live is the example at this time, finding vent in the lighter journals, strove to render them ridiculous. Ridiculous is the claim of the papacy over Protestant England. It's a joke. Okay? So England took two attempts, two sides. They dealt with it seriously, and they also mocked the papacy's phony attempt to assert himself as King of Kings and Lord of Lords over England. I recommend America do the same thing. I'll be back right after this. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Visit crosstheborder.org CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the program and keep it on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors it. And if you'd like to contact me, please do so directly by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now back to the book, page 51, the first full paragraph. England used both grave argument and mockery to send a message to the papacy. And the message was this: Britons will never be slaves, either to Puseyism or to the Pope. And that's the message America needs to send to the papacy today. By grave argument or by levity, or both, Americans will never be slaves to Puseyism or the papacy. We will not crucify Christ afresh. We will not replace God's holy, immutable, and eternal law with Roman Catholic canon law, and we will worship Christ and Him only in spirit and in truth, and we reject lock, stock, and barrel the ecumenical movement to reunite with the idolatrous sodomite Church of Rome. And we insist that the popes and his Jesuits get out of government. Get out of this country. Don't ever come back, because you'll be met with the full force of the American military and the right arm of Christ. That's the message that England needed to send to the Pope at this time, and this is the message that the United States needs to send to the papacy at this time. We just finished reading a book called The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. He not only admitted, he boasted that the papacy is absolutely essential to the government of the United States of America and is already controlling it. And our laws, our civil laws, are already commensurate with Roman Catholic canon law. We already are slaves to popery. And we need to undo that slavery, and only we, the body of Christ, full of the Holy Ghost, well read in the Scriptures, determined to put Christ back on his throne, we are the only ones that can kick popery out of this country. It's our job. And let us do it with God's blessing. Now, he says satire as well as grave argument was called into requisition on this great national emergency. Reason, speaking through the higher organs of the press, labored to prove through grave argument that the claims of the pontifical court, the claim to this land, were unfounded and treasonable. And laughter, on the other hand, mockery, finding vent in the lighter journals of the press, the less serious journals of the press, strove to render those papal claims ridiculous. That's what we need to do. But first, we need to educate the American people, because they don't even know who the enemy is or how to attack him. All right? He says the shafts of irony grazed the cardinal's hat. Shafts mean in representation of arrows, the shaft of an arrow. The shafts of irony grazed the cardinal's hat. In other words, a shot had been fired over the bow of the papal bark. Okay? And he says, it was announced with great mock formality, that His Eminence Cardinal Pantaleon had arrived at the Golden Cross, the Charing Cross, and that he was bearer of a message to the chief of the British government demanding the usual acknowledgement on the part of the sovereign of Great Britain, which has been always and from all time a fief of the Holy See. Okay? Making mockery. Okay? This is how you make mockery. And he says, in case of obstinate recussancy, which was not apprehended, His Eminence was commissioned to proclaim the Prince of Lucca sovereign of these islands. The prince being direct and undoubted descendant of those legitimate monarchs of England who were driven by rebellion, the one to death and the other to banishment from their palace of Whitehall. It was also announced that the Holy Father had appointed Monsignor Snooks, with the title of Marquis St. Bartholomew, Lord Chancellor of England, Vice Lord Truro, who had not resigned, that the Palace of Bedlam, the Palace of Bedlam would be occupied by the new primate until the Palace of Lambeth could be vacated by the titular Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. Sumner, to whom the office of parish beadle had been offered. That the Cardinal of Westminster would immediately be taken possession of by its rightful owners. That the heathen temple erected on the site of the old Basilica of St. John's would be given to Madame Tussaud, who was in treaty for it, and that in fine the statue of St. Mary Axe, opposite the post office, had on the previous Wednesday begun to wink with its left eye in so convincing a manner that 33 letter carriers and 2 commercial gentlemen staying at the Bull in the Mouth were instantly converted. Okay? Quite a mouthful I just read, but it's a mockery of this pretended authority of the papacy. And even invoking in mocking terms that even a Roman Catholic statue of Mary began to wink her eye in approval of what the Pope was trying to do. All right. Now it says, thus the movement appeared to be truly national. It extended to all parts of the kingdom. It embraced all classes and ranks, from the Prime Minister downward. It included all bodies, from the hierarchs of England to the Methodists of Wales and the Presbyterians of Scotland, from the corporation of the metropolis to the town councils of the provinces. Memorials were presented to the Queen and petitions were sent to Parliament. The whole nation got involved. And it says the country presented the appearance of a vast spiritual camp, and the din of spiritual war rung over the whole land. A touch of the melodramatic was thrown into what appeared to be fast becoming a tragedy by, quote, the Right Reverend Father in God, William Lord Bishop of Brecon, unquote. This prelate was heard to lift up his voice in the midst of the commotion and protest against the papal aggression on the ground of its being an unbrotherly act. Listen, I am no brother of the Pope. The Pope can't commit an unbrotherly act to me. He can only blaspheme his Creator. That's right. His Creator is Christ. The papacy is no judge of anybody. He can't even judge himself. He is a created being. He's not to be worshipped. Okay? He's not to be obeyed. Man ought to obey God and not men. That's what our Bible says. Now it says he held an invasion of the rights of one bishop by another bishop. Here again I have a problem. The so-called Bishop of Rome is not a bishop at all. He is nothing in the world except what the Bible calls him. The Bible is infallible, not the papacy. And the Bible calls him the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. He's no bishop. He's nothing in the world. And the whole world wanders after him. And we must repent. Okay, he held an invasion of the rights of one bishop by another bishop. It was, monstrous and unheard of usurpation. The Bishop of Rome intruding into the diocese of his brother, the Bishop of Brecon. See, I don't make this mistake. Roman Catholicism is not Christianity. It's paganism in the name of Christ. The papacy has no legitimate office in the world. No legitimate authority. What he has been given to him by an ignorant world. And if the world ever wakes up to that ignorance, then it will understand the way I do that the papacy is nothing in the world and he should be ignored, if not defeated. The first lethal blow that was ever issued to the papacy came at the time of the Protestant Reformation, when the vast percentage of Europe finally recognized, after reading the scriptures for themselves, what the papacy really represented in the world. And they stripped him of all of his spiritual power. They stripped him of all of his temporal power. They overturned the world. They liberated mankind from Satan's vicar. And it can happen again. We just have to let go of the ignorance and tell the truth. The papacy is no representation at all of the God of glory. If he represents anything in this world, he represents his spiritual father, Satan himself. Now, what heed do we pay to such a one? None. Then, after we've made our point perfectly clear to the whole world that our government will have to step down and make way for a Christian government in this country, a Protestant government, only then can Christ truly rule and reign in this country. And if Christ does not rule and reign, then the door is wide open for this usurper in Rome. Not making a choice is a choice. Now he says the only practical measure which resulted from all this amount of protestation was the Ecclesiastical Titles Act. Okay? This whole national controversy, which had raged for a long time, until England finally said, we will never be slaves of either Puseyism or Popery. They went to work in the Parliament to come up with a piece of legislation that would make the point permanent. And all they came up with was one act. It was called the Ecclesiastical Titles Act. Now listen to what he says about it. He says, as a measure of resistance to papal aggression, the act was miserably inadequate. Okay? As originally drafted, it contained some clauses which might have helped to defeat one main object of the Church of Rome, which the Church of Rome had in view in the aggression, namely, the more easy accumulation of property from deathbeds. Okay? If the act would have been successful, it would have at least prevented Roman Catholics on their deathbed from bequeathing their property, their land, British land, to the Pope, a foreign potentate. I mean, after all, when Britain was Roman Catholic before King Henry IV, as much as a third of the land belonged to the Pope. England couldn't even sustain itself because Roman Catholicism teaches that you can virtually buy salvation through indulgences. Remember, that's what started the Protestant Reformation, the selling of indulgences. Even Martin Luther, a Roman Catholic monk, realized that this was a sin. You can't buy grace. Okay? He read the scriptures for himself. It comes by grace through faith, not money. And so the Protestant Reformation took off, but before the Protestant Reformation, England was Catholic. And Catholics on their deathbeds, fearing the eternal fires of purgatory, as they're taught in the Roman Catholic Church, would try to buy grace by giving their children's inheritance to the priest, who would claim the land for the Pope. And then that land and the proceeds from it, the crops or animals or whatever, livestock, the profits from the land, went to embellish the Roman Catholic Church, not to sustain the nation or the people that lived there. And Great Britain was destitute. England was destitute. Now that has been the main fixture in Roman Catholic countries always. The papacy owns the land, and the government manages the land for the papacy. Now, if popery is allowed to continue in this country at the rate that it's expanding in its control of our government and the passage of its laws, that's exactly what's going to happen in this country. That the land of this country will be owned by the papacy, even if it has to be owned by cooperative third parties. Ultimately, the trail of ownership will end at the Vatican. Now, this is a virtual guarantee because it happens everywhere Roman Catholicism is dominant. This is how the Pope controls the kings of the earth, because he owns the land. Okay? That the government is just a fief. A fiefdom of the papacy. The papacy's got all the power because it's got all the money, because it's got all the land. So this legislation passed in Britain was at least going to stop the arterial bleeding of land from the country to possession by the papacy. That's at least all that it effectively could have stopped, except for one technicality. We're going to get to it here. All right, he said, let's see, where was I? Oh, he says the only practical measure which resulted from all this amount of protestation was the Ecclesiastical Titles Act. Remember the name, the Ecclesiastical Titles Act. As a measure of resistance to the papal aggression, the act was miserably inadequate. As originally drafted, it contained some clauses which might have helped to defeat one main object of the Church of Rome that the Roman Catholic Church had in view in this aggression, namely the more easy accumulation of property from deathbeds. The original draft, after prohibiting under a penalty of £100, merely £100, the assumption of ecclesiastical titles taken from any place in the United Kingdom, except in the case of the dignitaries of the established church, that is, the Protestant Church of England, went on to declare null and void all deeds executed by persons bearing the prohibited titles. And it provided, moreover, that all legacies and gifts bequeathed to persons with such titles, or for their purposes, should be confiscated to the crown. All right. The Ecclesiastical Titles Act forbid anyone but those appointed by the Queen in the Church of England to have titles named like the Bishop of London. Okay? Nobody in the Roman Catholic Church could assume that title, Bishop of London. All right? So that no Briton could bequeath his land to anyone of that title, Bishop of London. So if Rome tried to appoint a bishop or a cardinal, Bishop of London, then any bequest by a British subject to that Bishop of London, any land or any valuable good, would be confiscated by the Queen. In other words, that property would remain the property of England, so that the Pope couldn't eventually possess the whole land as he did before. All right. He says, even had the bill passed with these provisions, so necessary for the protection of the subject, and especially of dying papists, means would easily have been found to evade it. Okay? Even if they had passed, they were written in such a way that it was easy to get around it. Okay? This is why the legislation was woefully inadequate to the very start. It said, simply by omitting the quasi-title in a deed of gift, or by substituting one particle for another, as for instance an at for an of, in other words, the Bishop at London instead of the Bishop of London, the bill would have been rendered inoperative and the deathbed of the papist thrown wide open to the invasion of the priest. So merely if it had passed, even if it had passed in its original form, all the bishops of Rome would have to do is just change their title by substituting the word of with the word at. And then the papists, the dying Roman Catholics in the country, could get by with bequeathing their children's inheritance and the land of England to the Pope. Okay, you talk about a legal loophole, and who's responsible for making this legislation so weak? Well, I have my opinion, and that's all it can be, but you can bet your bippy that the English Parliament was dominated by Freemasons. And it was Freemasonry, a concordant order of the Jesuit order that made that legislation weak as a cat. All right, even those professing Protestants in Parliament, if they were Freemasons, they were taking orders from the Jesuit order and thinking they were doing God's bidding. And that's how that legislation got passed through Parliament with not even enough strength to blow its nose. And the same operation takes place here in the United States of America. People who profess themselves Protestants, who have not a clue what Protestantism is really all about, join Freemasonry as if they're doing God's service. And what they find out they're doing is doing the work of Satan in this world. They're serving the Jesuit general. They're serving the papacy ultimately. And they dominate government. They dominate law enforcement. They dominate in the press, and they particularly dominate in the ecumenical evangeli-belly churches. Because if you run down the list of futurist Protestant pastors in this country, the most famous names of Protestantism in this country, like Pat Robertson, and I could go on and on and on and on and on, and every name I mentioned you would recognize. If you investigate, you will find out they are Roman Catholics, and what have they contributed to this country? They have contributed by indoctrinating the churches with futurism. The idea that the Antichrist is a future individual, we don't have to worry about him, and that leaves the door wide open for the acceptance of the papacy as the leader of the Christian world. The same thing was going on in Britain at the time of the writing of this book and the promulgation of this legislation to protect England from papal usurpation. It was the Jesuits controlling Freemasonry in Parliament that destroyed this legislation, which when it finally was passed didn't have enough power to blow its nose, much less stop the progression of the papal aggression in Great Britain. It's time for us to wake up. There is truly something to learn by this book, Rome and Civil Liberty by J.A. Wiley. I encourage you to get your own copy and read it, and continue with me again tomorrow on the program. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. I'll see you tomorrow.